Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this week's episode, Jeremy King discusses the life lessons that have informed his decades-long career as a restaurateur.
I think generosity leads us into the realms of altruism, and altruism is so essential. It all starts, I lecture my staff on when people walk through the door. If you see them walking through the door as a potential source of income, you're finished. Whereas if you see somebody coming through the door as an opportunity, and the opportunity is to give somebody a great time, then you have a chance of achieving that. And if you give people a great time, then you make money. It's as simple as that. But generosity, for me, is very much about when you think you've done enough, is recognizing that enough is never enough and going a little bit further, doing things you don't have to. I like the generosity. Something I've done for years is, particularly when we had Zedel, it started, and Zedel was a very, very, very affordable restaurant. You could say a cheap restaurant, and I loved it because it was a treat for a student and a canteen for the more affluent. My staff were incredulous when I said at the end of the meal we're going to give people a small glass of Pinot de Charente, which is a small French dessert wine. And I explained it to them. It's like that limoncello moment when you're in the Amalfi Coast or something and they bring you that limoncello as a gift. Now, you can rationalize it and say, actually, it doesn't cost that much money and you've just spent all this, so actually, in the realm of things. But they didn't have to do it, and so it feels generous. And the greatest generosity, of course, is the human generosity of caring, of loving, empathizing. But the problem in modern hospitality at the moment is that people just feel they should do enough. It's interesting. One of the most prolific gamblers I knew was Lucian Freud, and yet, as he got older, he gave up gambling, and the reason being is because he could afford to lose. And great gambling is when you are risking everything. So I learned to gamble by a phone call when I was in the merchant bank, and the man in the banking hall, a friend of mine, he said, the client's just come in and drawn down £5,000. I earned £1,000 a year at that point. He's just drawn down 5 times my salary, and he's putting £2,000 each way on a horse in the Derby at 50 to 1. I think you should get on it. I don't remember how much I actually bet, but it was enough that it preoccupied me. And of course, I only got 33 to 1. When I look back in reflection, that evening I went with 2 friends to the Prince Charles cinema off Leicester Square, where they were showing the hottest film in every single way, which was Last Tango in Paris. And as a 20-year-old young man, 19 or 20 years, that was a massive fascination. But I couldn't think of anything else other than the horses. And I started to bet on them. And because I'm arithmetic, I became quite good at it. But the risk element is that I would go to a wine bar on a Friday with my friend, and I would have to put every single penny I had on the horses in a combination of bets, and then go and see just before 6 o'clock whether I'd won or not. And if I hadn't won, I was walking home unless somebody lent me money. There was no ATMs, there's no season tickets for the tube. The risk has to be that something goes wrong. This very much is underscored by my interest in the throwing dice on elements of my life. And each day, because I was bored in the bank, I would write out options of what I would be that day. Well, that might be if I threw a 1, I'd go to work, but I'd pretend I'd lost my voice. Or 2, I'd go to work and pretend I'd fallen in love with the ghastly man who was the manager of the place. Or 3, I'd go to work and I'd be Long John Silver. Or so it would go on. Or 6, the risk element in those days is just don't go to work. And it started to build up and up and up. There has to be a danger for a gambler to thrive. When I met with Chris, he was working at Langan's and I was working at Joe Allen, and we got to know each other and resolved to open a restaurant. One of the interesting things about risk and danger is that to people like me, it doesn't necessarily feel like a big risk. And Chris at the time didn't want to go back into what was then the Caprice. I said to him, listen, if we don't try it, we'll regret it for the rest of our life. It'll always be there. If we do it and it goes wrong, so be it. People say, well, at least they tried. I said, but if we go back and succeed, we'll become the toast of London, which is a very odd thing for me to say. It's not my sort of language and it's a bit sort of self-congratulatory, but if there's no risk, it's too easy. My problem is that what I want, well, I did know what I wanted, but I knew I couldn't do it. I wanted to be a creator, and I knew I couldn't write or paint or compose or perform to the level which would make me happy. I was very tempted to be an architect, but I still didn't believe, and that's partly my own self-deprecation perhaps, but I didn't really believe that I'd make a great architect, and ended up throwing dice which took me into hospitality full time rather than go to university. Terrible mistake. But I went to career guidance, and in those days it wasn't computerized, of course. At the end of this long multiple choice questionnaire, they said, so what can we do for you, Mr. King? And I said, I just need to be told what I should do because I can make myself good, I think, at anything, whatever I do, I think I can be good. Just tell me. And they said, well, normally people ask that and normally we can't tell them. It's very complicated, but with you, we can tell you with absolute certainty what your career should be. I said, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I wanted. Tell me. He said, you should be an accountant. And I said, well, I know why you say that because I saw all those questions and I resisted them at the time, but I am incredibly arithmetic. I'm very good with figures and so on. That's why you want me to be, but I couldn't be an accountant to save my life. They said, not in any form. And I said, well, I suppose I could do turf accountancy, i.e. be a bookmaker. In my life, I had this funny realization when I think I was about 12, 13, something like that. And I got a holiday job working in the school, which my mother was secretary for. And the first job I was given was to sweep the gym, this massive gym with a bit of a rickety old brush. And I thought, oh, and I had no interest. But the moment I said to myself, I will sweep this gym better than this gym has ever been swept before. And if you apply that to life, then you have a chance of success. Failure to me is not being proud of what I've created. The great thing about it, I've had notional failure. I remember when I opened Zadell, which was very different to most restaurants. And about 15 months, 18 months in, I was ambushed by my board and investors. They said, when are you going to realize that this is never going to work? When are you going to realize that this vanity project of yours is a failure? When are you going to realize that you endanger the whole company by your continued belief in this place? I said, not just yet. We stayed with it, and a few months later it became incredibly successful. And of course, in normal style, that same board tried to take all the credit for it. I mean, I love that old saying, success has many parents, failure is an orphan. I'm quite happy to at least give failure single parentage. I think we fail in different ways. We can have plenty of money, we can have notional success, and I had this argument with staff a lot. In these inductions, the questions they'd ask, why are you still working when you're so successful? And I said, what is successful? And somebody will say, well, it's about how much money you have. And I would say, oh, well, yeah, okay, does everybody agree with that? Success is about money? And they went, yes. I said, great, well, you'll all be thrilled to hear that every one of you, I'm sure, is more successful than me. And they said, well, how can that be? I said, because if you had the debts that I have, you would be crying. If this works, I've got a big shareholder, but it means nothing. If it works, I will be notionally more successful than you. But I think of reputational success more than anything. Most of the people I envy and admire, and I consider to be successful, are not rich. Never accept to do in the future something you wouldn't be happy to be doing tonight, because soon it'll be tonight. And when that invitation comes through, you give a quick no. You just say no. And you don't give a reason. You don't explain or anything, because your real friends don't need it and your enemies don't believe it. In hospitality, in terms of lessons, the thing which I think is the most important, and I say to anybody who asks me for advice, is keep control. If it means keeping it small, keep control. People will lure you into things in life, generally, not just in hospitality, on the basis of it's better to have 30% of something big than 60 or 70% of something small. Wrong. And many a well-known chef or restaurateur who come and get advice from me because they've been offered lots of money, but they're giving away control of their company. And I say, you will regret it forevermore, unless it's a phenomenal amount of money, and that's what you care about. The story in life which I always love came from Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22. He was a wonderful man. I remember reading in, I think it was New York magazine rather than New Yorker, where he was interviewed, and this lady had said to him, Joseph Heller, icon, one of the greatest books of the 20th century, and the film was pretty good too, and it's amazing, but let's face it, you haven't written anything as good since. And he looked at her and he said, quietly and calmly, no, I haven't. But there again, nor has anybody else. There was a good story about him which Barry Humphries told me, and I think it may have been attributed to a couple of people, but Barry Humphries, Joseph Heller, and this big hedge funder effectively grew up together, and they were poor, and they started to make money. I'm not sure if it was college. And Barry was on tour in New York, and the hedge funder had this massive house, and he said, come out and have lunch on the deck. And the deck was like 150 foot long, between a pond and the sea, and everything was amazing. But the hedge funder kept getting interrupted and had to go off to his private office, and he left Joseph and Barry alone, looking out over the waters. And Barry is saying, Joseph, this is amazing, isn't it? And Joseph had said, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Barry said, I bet you wouldn't mind this. And Joseph said, no, I'd be really happy with this. Barry said, I thought I'd spice it up. And I said, come on, Joe, admit, how jealous are you? And that made him animate. He said, don't you dare say that. I'm not jealous. I'm not envious or anything. He said, well, you must be. I mean, it's amazing. He said, no, I'm not jealous or envious, because I have more than him. And Barry said, no, I mean, you've done well, but he's 50 times richer. He said, no, I have more than him. So explain. He said, I have more than him because I have enough, and he'll never have enough. And it's true that in life, so the lesson big lesson I've learned is that I know people who are on £25,000 a year who have enough. They'd like more, but they have enough, and they can be happy and they can be fulfilled. And I know people on £25 million a year who have nothing like enough. And that, for me, is a life credo.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.